Hi, my name is Dan Gomez, and this is Mental Health Super Omnia. Mental health above all. We identify and understand mental health issues and the paths for help. Today, we want to talk about emergency responders, and in particular, the mental health danger they can be in. We have three guests. First, Kellie Paschke. Kellie is a partner at Skinner and Paschke and practices primarily in the areas of employment and labor law. She specializes in representing public safety professionals, such as police officers and firefighters who suffer from PTSD, cancer, and other workplace injuries. Next, David Albrecht. David practices exclusively in employment law at the Fiedler Law Firm. He's taken more than a dozen cases to verdict and has argued before the Iowa Court of Appeals, the Iowa Supreme Court, and the Eighth Circuit of Appeals. Finally, we have Kellie Medendorp. Kellie is a clinical social worker and volunteer firefighter, leading the Emergency Responders Therapy Center of Excellence at Equilibria Psychological. With deep roots in a military and first responder family, she knows firsthand the culture and challenges that make it hard to reach out for help. Her work focuses on post-traumatic growth, showing responders that PTSD and other diagnoses are not the end of their career, but an opportunity for resilience and recovery. Kellie Paschke, we read the New York Times article, "Why Do More Police Officers Die by Suicide Than in the Line of Duty?" Could you summarize for us what happened in the Matthew Hunter case and focus in on how police leadership did not, or in general does not, address their officers' mental health?
Absolutely, and thank you for having us today. Matt Hunter was a 20-year career law enforcement officer. He was best friends with another sergeant named Joe Morgan. And the case surrounded Officer Morgan's untimely death by suicide. And that hit Matt Hunter pretty hard. What we discovered was ultimately Matthew Hunter got no help and got no resources, wasn't trained to identify the grief that he was feeling and everything that goes along with it. After years and years of being a police officer and seeing, hundreds of traumatic events, the department just didn't equip him to handle that emotional toll. And so Matt Hunter's case culminated. He had an incident off duty where he was experiencing a mental health crisis due to the death of his best friend and former law enforcement partner. And Matt was arrested. Simple misdemeanor, public intoxication, but he was clearly in crisis. The department fired him within less than 30 days later, offered him no help, no resources, and no second chances. And so Matt decided to stand up for himself and officers just like him who experience these traumas, suffer these crises, and don't get the help and the support that they need from their department. Ultimately, along with David's help, we took the case to trial, and we received a successful verdict for this.
Dan, you're on mute.
Speaking of which, when just so we don't have any feedback, put your microphone on mute when you're not talking. Okay, Kellie Medendorp, have you dealt with other police officers that have dealt with that level of PTSD, their partner dying, or other traumatic incidents? I mean, I've got to imagine it's got to be difficult being a police officer, dealing with absolutely nothing to traffic accidents, or maybe even a ticket, to something that's traumatic like a suicide or dismemberment or what have you.
Mm-hmm. So from my clinical background and just from being in that community itself, it's everywhere. I was noticing it even before getting into this from the clinical perspective and doing it for therapy. And it's not talked about very much. So a lot of times, and what I'm discovering with the clients that I'm working with now from the therapeutic standpoint is they really don't know what this mental health stuff is, when it's showing up, why it's showing up. So it can be hard to ask for help if you're not educated about it. I live in that world, so I know it inside and out. But for the average person, this isn't something that, unless somebody else talked to you about it, you would really know that that's what you're dealing with.
So, David, you must have spent a lot of time with Matthew Hunter. At one point in time, the police chief said if I've understood the quote correctly, by now you've heard Sergeant Joe Morgan killed himself. We're never going to know why. And that was it. That was all that was said. Did that have any impact on Matthew Hunter or on the other police officers?
Yeah, I think there was a decent amount of testimony on this, and Matt had actually testified that his recollection of that meeting wasn't just the chief saying, we'll never know why, but that he had followed it up by saying, and we're not going to waste any time trying to figure it out. So that's some of Matt's testimony. And I think that it, you know, for the officers that talked about it, it just sort of reinforced this idea that while we're going to say things and send out maybe some training modules about preventing these sorts of accidents, these incidents, there was really no work on the back end in this objectively awful situation to figure out, you know, how was Officer Morgan, Sergeant Morgan, affected by work. He had been a longtime officer of the department as well. And, you know, for finding some correlation there, what can we do to prevent this from happening again? You would hope, you would think that after what happened with Joe, they would be doing anything and everything to prevent it from happening again. And the testimony at trial was basically that, you know, police departments, police and fire, they're paramilitary, right? So top down, very, very important what that leadership structure and culture looks like. And I think that the testimony at trial was just simply that the desire just wasn't there.
So Kellie Paschke, this doesn't make any sense to me. It's the recruiting goals are many times not met across the country. It's difficult to find the right people. You finally have got people, you've trained them up, but yet you're not. But yet the leadership isn't spending the time and making sure that people are well, are being able to do their job, you know, in the manner that they're supposed to be doing it, and aren't a danger to both themselves and to the public. What am I missing?
Well, I don't think that you're missing anything. I think the problem stems from leadership who has not taken the time to understand the importance of mental health and what it really means to make sure its officers and firefighters are getting help, but also a fundamental misunderstanding about whether or not somebody can control those outcomes. I think there's still a common misbelief that among police and fire leadership that their employees can control behaviors or control whether or not, you know, they can stuff it down and avoid those mental health consequences. And as I'm sure Kellie can attest to, we can't always do that. And so they want perfection. Leadership often wants perfection. And as we sometimes say in our lawyer universe, they don't want the land of broken toys. They want the perfect officer and the perfect firefighter. And when somebody doesn't meet that mold, they're viewed as imperfect and a liability and tossed aside.
So Kellie, help me out on that. I'm not sure I completely get it. You train people up, you've invested in them, you want them to succeed. How could leadership not be spending the time required in order to make sure that everybody is 100%?
Mm-hmm. So I can kind of see both sides to that one too. The one thing I wanted to add was the fact that a lot of times either leadership or even just peers themselves are looking for that perfect officer, responder, whatever it is, but it doesn't exist. And I feel like a lot of people, especially the public, don't realize that there is nobody that gets into that profession and is completely immune to trauma or feeling something after a fairly traumatic incident that they show up on. We're all human at the end of the day. So there will be a point in time in any responder's career that there's going to be a call that hits them a little bit differently than the other ones, or for them, it's going to hit them. And then for their peers, it won't. It's just kind of the way that it works. On the flip side of things, I can also understand with leadership that they do not necessarily have the time or space to give to mental health. And that's not to give them an excuse. It's just, I know right now how hard it is to get people into this field. I know it's short-staffed pretty much across the board when you think of fire, EMS, nurses, police, all that. So when you start talking about having a responder that isn't doing well and might need time off, on one hand, I think leadership does want to help, but then on the other hand, it then becomes a staffing issue, and you can't not have emergency services staffed. It's 24/7, 365 days a year. You have to have people able to respond. So it's not a great excuse, but it also kind of is the reality of emergency services.
So Kellie Paschke, it seems to me that, as David said, if these organizations are fundamentally paramilitary, they have a very hierarchical structure, that these same problems exist, whether it's a police officer or firefighter or in other emergency responder situations. Are you seeing it in the other organizations? And if you are seeing it in the other organizations, once somebody is caught up in that, they have a problem, what are they supposed to do?
Well, so yes, to answer the first part of your question, and I'm sure David can attest to this too, because he also represents a number of first responders. We're seeing it everywhere. And I would say, I don't know if it's increasing in prevalence or first responders are just understanding more and they have more awareness of what's going on. And so they're doing better at reaching out and getting representation and getting help. But we're seeing it everywhere among all types of first responders. I represent primarily first responders, and I have them from police, fire, EMS, and the whole range within those disciplines. And so I think, the second part of your question, I think normalizing the behavior of getting help, maybe, would go a long way. We still have this problem where mental health is stigmatized in this country, and absolutely within this profession or these professions. And so we see a lot of departments who maybe give mental health some lip service with things like annual check-ins, which we absolutely support and think are a good thing, but they're not a substitute for somebody who has actual mental illness or needs mental health help. They're just not a substitute. They're helpful, but not something that can replace that actual therapy. And so bringing down the stigma, normalizing the type of treatment and behavior that people need, I think would go a long.
So David, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, when you take a look at the organizations overall, it seems to me that they're wasting money by not making sure that their people are 100%.
Yeah, I think that in my mind kind of calls back to the idea of the myths, fears, and stereotypes about folks who are struggling with disabilities, whether that's mental or physical. Those don't make sense, right? Treating somebody differently based on a myth or a stereotype doesn't make sense a lot of the time. And I agree with you. There were these communications that Matt had sent after his arrest. Prior to his termination, he held himself very accountable, and he had sent missives out to the chief. And one of the last ones said, the people that know me know this isn't who I am. There are actual real underlying issues here. I'm seeking help. And he talks about taking steps to get the help needed to move forward and to come out of this with an even greater understanding and compassion as it relates to the people of the community. So I agree with you. I think that, Matt could have been an asset, and he was doing what he could to take tragedy and turn it into something positive for the community that he serves. And I think part of the challenge, and I don't have a good answer, and I don't have any clinical background, so I can't speak to any of that, is we see these resources on paper, but then we hear from real people that say they're just not utilized because of this fear of being perceived as weak. And so they self-medicate. And how do we get from resources on paper to resources in real life and actually taking advantage? And I think Kellie's point about normalizing it is really important. I'd be interested to know what Kellie Medendorf has on that too, just because, I'll take all the help I can get.
Kellie.
The one thing I would add to that I hear a lot working with this population is this idea, and it was mentioned in that article too by, I think it was Matt that said it, that they feel like there's this piece of glass in front of them and they're on one side and everybody else is on the other side. And I hear that so frequently when people have some kind of trauma, depression, or mental health thing that's going on, where it's like, I can't even relate to the people around me anymore. And I want to, I really, really want to, but there's nobody's taught me anything to be able to figure that out. And then going back to the stigma with everything in this community, I'm not going to seek help unless it gets really, really bad, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I want to catch people sooner rather than later. So the way that we're trying to do that is I'm recruiting other therapists that either have a first responder background themselves, or they have family or friends that they are close with and supportive of this population. So we're trying to get therapists that are more culturally competent, because we're not an easy population to get into. Especially when it comes to therapy, they've been let down time and time again. And I wish I could say that that was a problem years ago, but it's still happening now, where they go into a therapist's office and they have to worry about, can I say all the things that are on my mind? Can this person handle it? Are they going to judge the things coming out of my mouth? Because it's a rough job that they do. They're going to say some off the wall things sometimes, but that's the reality of the work that they do. And they're trying to find ways to cope with it without anybody actually really telling them how. So my biggest thing is just having people available that actually understand and support this population, and getting in front of them as much as you can. Because I can send brochures and emails out all day long, but when I make a connection with somebody in person, it's much different. And I can let them know personally that, hey, I care. I want to hear what you have to say. When you're ready, call us up, just ask.
But, Kellie, I'm not sure that that's enough. When I heard David speak just a moment ago, he quoted Matthew and said, people that know me. So everybody, whether they're a policeman, they're a firefighter, if they're having some trouble, they know other people in the organization. Other people, there must be somebody in the organization that perceives that there's an issue. Do people inside of a particular emergency responder organization just not bother to reach out to their friends or to their coworkers, or what's the culture like there?
It can be like that, because if you think about stereotypically who does this type of work, talking about feelings generally isn't at the top of mind for them. So that's something that is still kind of getting worked on. But the other thing is, I have to remind a lot of my clients frequently that you're working within a system that is sick at the end of the day. Like I said, the emergency services are very tapped out these days, and there's not necessarily people coming in to relieve them or replace them. So if we're relying on a system that's already strained to help the people within it, which does make sense, and that's how it should be, but there's a lot that they're handling. So they're trying to do more like peer support type of groups within the departments, so that it's a little bit more of a smoother handoff for these kinds of things, and to have people to check in with. But a lot of times, some of the groups that I talk to that are within this community, what we talk about is just checking in with people and checking in with them frequently and just saying, hey, are you good? Because sometimes that can go a long way.
Now, Kellie Paschke, David said something else. He mentioned self-medication. And, I've heard that phrase from many different people. I enjoy a glass of wine. I enjoy scotch, maybe even a glass of bourbon now and again. Everybody self-medicates to some extent, but you must see in your work people that have gone to excess, not just in alcohol, but in other things that they're exhibiting other behaviors other than just PTSD. What are you seeing once you and David are involved?
Yeah, so alcohol is the number one thing, and the self-medication that goes along with it, whether it's consistently on a regular basis or happens less frequently but still in significant excess. Also self-destructive behaviors. I see police officers and firefighters behaving in a way, either verbally or sometimes even physically, that they would not normally do in their everyday life. So that self-destructive behavior, those two things are often, in my work from a disciplinary standpoint, the first time when they're being investigated internally at work, it's those behaviors that really cause the officer or the firefighter to realize something's not right with them. Because up until that point, up until their job is in jeopardy, they think they're just doing what everybody else is doing, and nobody's telling them that it's a symptom of something else. So in Matt Hunter's case, he testified that 70% of his after Joe Morgan's suicide, he went and was ordered to go see the department psychologist. He was ordered to go 3 weeks later, and it was just a single appointment. And at that appointment, the department psychologist cleared him for duty, never gave him any idea of what symptoms to look for that might be a symptom of a bigger problem, like PTSD. So he was too soon to be diagnosed with PTSD. It had only been 3.5 weeks, and he wasn't given the tools necessary to identify if he was in trouble later. And ultimately, he was in trouble. And he was told at his one appointment with the department psychologist that all of his feelings were normal and that he was okay. So that's what he went on believing. He went on believing that the drinking was okay, and sort of the isolation that he was doing and the self-rumination, all of those things were okay because that's how he was supposed to feel, not recognizing that it could be a sign of a bigger problem. And I'll add to that, just to backtrack on one of your questions a little bit, one of the other things we need to start doing is separating the department psychologist from the mental health check-ins. The number of people who come in my door who have told me, I don't feel like I can actually talk to the department psychologist during my mental health check-in because I don't trust them, is phenomenal. And so we need to really separate those two for those annual mental health check-ins to be effective for first responders.
Well, I worked with a very capable officer at or military guy at one time, and we had to fill out some corporate forms. And he told me, I was very young, very early in my career, and he said, "Look, Dan, the objective of this form is to get it filled out so that nothing on it ever comes back to you." So, in that light, if I'm going to my check-in with my psychologist in order to get cleared for duty, what's my objective? It's to get cleared for duty. It's not to present issues, right? So if they the case, where is it that they end up going wrong? That they end up not, because they didn't go, they started self-destructive behavior or whatever. When is it that, what are those disciplinary actions? What's causing those disciplinary actions? And when is it that you two guys get involved in order to try and bring this back together?
Well, the disciplinary, there's been a variety of types of disciplinary actions, but as I said, most of them involve alcohol or some other type of self-destructive behavior that, in my opinion, could be prevented. So how can that be prevented? Where are these departments going wrong? I'll go back to the thing I said at the beginning. It starts with the stigma. We have to get rid of the stigma. The less stigma there is in police and fire and first responders about getting and taking mental health treatment seriously, the more likely they are to do it, right? Right now, there's a constant fear among first responders that if they do have a mental health condition or if they're, struggling a little bit, that they're seen as weak and they're going to be fired. And unfortunately, that bears out. It bears out often. And so, getting rid of that stigma needs to be layer number one. And I think that starts at the top with your command staff, with your chiefs, with your assistant chiefs and your majors. After that, separating, what might be, I think we're talking about two different types of mental health check-ins. We're talking about things that are maybe a response to a critical incident. So a critical incident debriefing, which are often mandatory after something has happened. And then we're talking about the annual wellness check-ins, like just trying to get them in front of a counselor or somebody that they can talk to, right? That's not just, as Kelly said, something on paper. It's much more effective when it's in person. Separating what those are and who performs those, I think is critical, because right now they're all being done by the same people, and therefore they're not opening up like they should in those annual evaluations that are really designed to normalize the process. They're still closed off in those annual evaluations. And those aren't even evaluations that are being done for the purpose of clearing people for duty. They're just the process of getting in front of someone, and they're still closed off and not effectively utilizing it.
So David, when I look at these organizations, I don't look at the volunteer firefighters for a second, but I look for the people that are employed by the city. So they have unions. Most of these organizations have unions. How come the unions aren't stepping in to help their members? Isn't that their job?
This is a great question. It's a much better question for Kelly. She does a lot of union work. Generally, by the time I get involved, it's a little bit later down the road. Maybe there's already been a termination. So not to punt, but I think Kellie would be far better qualified to answer this one.
Yes, I do represent a number of police and fire unions. I will say the unions are trying. They, at least in Iowa where we practice, the unions are trying to negotiate it into their collective bargaining agreements every time, and create a process that they feel safe and comfortable. This is especially true. I think there's a bit of a difference between police and fire. Fire has seemed to really step it up and normalize the process a bit quicker, or embrace it a bit quicker than police have. And I think that's the nature of their differing roles within public safety. But every time we negotiate contracts, we try to include, a process or something to do with that mental health component. And unfortunately, it's often resisted by cities. And a lot of times it comes down to dollars and cents. They don't want to pay for it. They don't want to give people the time off, or they want to control the process. All of those things interfere with, I think, the effective help that could be provided if it was different.
So Kellie Middendorf, if I could give you an opportunity to address these same issues from the volunteer situation, number one. And number two, what's bothering me is that people like Matthew, I mean, I read the article, I've read the summary of the case. Clearly, he was giving off signals. Clearly, people in his life must have known there was something wrong. In fact, his wife, it was clear that perhaps his wife was in tune that something might be wrong, but didn't know exactly what it was. Not the cast aspersions. What's happening here? What signals are these people giving off? Our police and firefighter, emergency responders giving off when they're in crisis?
That makes me think of long before I even got into school for psychology and social work. I joined my volunteer fire company when I was, I think, like 16. And I knew I was interested in mental health and that kind of thing, but I wasn't really immersed in that world yet and understanding all the terms and everything behind it. And just going there and doing things and paying attention to the people that were around me, it became very apparent to me. And at the time, I didn't know what it was, that there was something going on with these guys that just tipped me off that like something's not right. Like we're fighting with each other about how to help our community. And it was almost like intentionally getting in each other's way, or, we, in our community, we tend to like tease each other, make fun of each other, give each other a hard time. And that's just kind of how it goes. But sometimes it almost felt like it was on another level for certain people. And then fast forward to when I get my degrees in psychology and social work, but I'm still involved with this community. And I step into a room or into a department and I look around and I'm like, man, like there's a lot of anger coming from these guys. And some of it's warranted, but a lot of it isn't. So to me, that's one of the first indicators with people is when you see a shift in like their attitude and their mood of how they usually are. And again, going back to what a lot of my people have said, which is I don't feel like myself anymore. That's like red flag number one to me. If somebody's not feeling like themselves, something's wrong.
So Kellie Paschke, anything to add? I mean, you've gotten to know Matthew Hunter extraordinarily well. I mean, you obviously had to, you were, soup to nuts on this guy's case. You understood everything. You were prepared for the legal work. What other signals was he giving off that indicated that there was a crisis going on?
Yeah, I mean, if he were sitting here, he'd say just the things that Kellie said. He didn't feel like himself. He felt disconnected, but then was told everything was normal. So he started to think these behaviors were normal. Leading up to his arrest, when he really found himself in crisis, he was, having intrusive thoughts, nightmares. He was drinking a lot. He had just responded to a very similar call in terms of the type of suicide, where it was a gunshot wound to the chest, which was the same way that his dear friend had died. And, people at the scene and even Matt himself noticed he became sort of disconnected from the scene. He needed a minute. He had to step away, but then he also felt this overpowering urge to kind of be stoic, right? And act like nothing affects him. And I think that's common among a lot of first responders. So at trial, we heard testimony, frankly, for the first time from some of his supervisors who testified that they had seen some of these differences in him too. And rather than get him help, which was what I think we would all expect, they instructed his lieutenant to keep an eye on him and, make sure he's doing okay. Well, they failed, right? But then took no responsibility for that action. But so they were definitely seeing the change in behavior, in Matt. Matt was seeing it in himself. Why nobody stepped in when they saw it, to this day, I can't really answer, other than, willful blindness, I guess, is the best way to describe it.
David, you've worked with a number of these departments as well, perhaps even the military yourself. I've got to imagine that, that stoicism is extraordinarily important in order to be effective. So if there's a tension between that stoicism and reaching out to somebody to try and be helpful, how does that ever get resolved, or does it get resolved? Does it always end up in lawsuits?
Hopefully not. And my experience with police and fire, I don't have any experience in the military, personally, or representing somebody. Just tends to be a different set of laws than we generally are following here, or representing folks. But I think that there are departments that are doing really well. I think we hear about some of those departments, and and a lot of that is a leadership mentality. It's the person at the top who is instilling this. I think a lot of it comes to when they begin as police officers. And I've heard from a lot of folks that say they did not even consider the trauma they would suffer for being a police officer. All they thought was the external trauma that they were going to help. And so, I don't know if it was Matt or somebody else talked about how they were surprised to learn about the high rates of PTSD and suicides among first responders, even years into the profession. It's just not something that they're coming to the table knowing or really understanding. And I think when the folks who maybe see something but they don't quite say something, a lot of the genesis to me is still that fear of what it means to be viewed as broken. I think that even a well-meaning supervisor might be afraid to force somebody to see somebody too early, because that might get that person pulled from their assignment or put on a desk job, or be viewed as something less than. To externalize that belief is to sort of give voice to that fear. So I think a lot of people tamp it down. And then it only comes up in these really terrible situations. And so I think that there's also, and it's something that we talk to juries about, the idea of, well, you signed up for this. Well, no, you didn't, right? But I think a lot of folks have that, and I think a lot of first responders internalize that. They think, well, this is just part of the job. The tough days, the extra, drink tonight, it's just part of the job. Matt talked about when he put that uniform on, he felt like Batman, right? He's behind the mask, he's there to save the day. And we talked to the jury about, well, the reason why people are endeared to people like Batman is, they have flaws. They're just like us. But I think that some departments really struggle with showing that. And I don't quite have the background maybe to help bridge the gap in that communication line. But one thing we heard over and over was, well, sure, we understand that he might have been struggling with an undiagnosed PTSD episode, but PTSD is no excuse. And that's how they viewed it. And I think that that's a bridge, or a gap we need to bridge. I'm not exactly, I think there are a lot of pieces that need to be involved to do that. But we heard that not just from, command staff, but from people on the front level, the front lines. And so how do we do that? I think is just a conversation piece going forward.
Fascinating. Kellie Middendorf, you must have met people along the way that were told, hey, this is just part of the job, but yet we're still giving off signals that there was something wrong. How do you resolve that? How do they get help? Do they talk to their spouse? Do they talk to their minister? What do they do?
People get told that all the time. And it's so sad because, David, to your point, it's not what they signed up for, because I don't think people understand that I decided to start volunteering as a 16-year-old. My 16-year-old brain wasn't thinking about, oh, well, what are all the crazy things that I could potentially see? Because if anyone's been paying any attention, humans can do some really messed up things to each other. And guess who are the people that go and resolve that situation? It's your first responders and your emergency responders. It's not the average person. So we can't sit here and think of every gruesome, horrible, tragic, traumatic incident that we could get called into. Our job is to show up and help people and do something about it. And we'll deal with our feelings and stuff later. As far as what people are supposed to do, I mean, even trying to confide in people outside of this community is hard because, one, you don't want to traumatize them by telling them too many details about something. And two, a lot of times people just don't feel like other people understand, which is very true, because I hear that a lot from when I'm working with responders and they're having issues with a spouse or a family member that doesn't understand the demands of the job, whether that's their shift work, time when they need to rest, or even just the actual incidents that they go on and how that impacts them. It's just, you come home from work, you should be able to do everything that we're doing, but their job is so different. As a therapist, I don't come to work every day worried about somebody potentially shooting me, but we have responders that is a reality for them. That's not normal. But then where's the line? When we're going back to this idea of stoicism, am I allowed to be overly stressed about that type of a day at work? Or should I just get used to that because that's the job that I'm in? And I think everybody from the get-go, whenever you're getting into a police academy, fire academy, EMS, whatever it is, should be educated about, you will be exposed to these things. Your mental health will be affected, but there's something you can do about it soon rather than later, because it's a lot of times we're seeing all this stuff when it's been put off for years, where somebody hasn't known what to do with it. That's where you see all this really bad behavior. If we caught that stuff more immediately, I could work with somebody for a couple of months and they would be fine. They wouldn't even have to necessarily take time off of work. You could go to outpatient therapy and still work and be okay. But then once things get to a certain point, now we're talking about pulling you out. You have to take a leave of absence, and that causes all kinds of problems that people don't want to deal with, and it gets to be too much.
Well, let's deal with that, because David, you brought this up when you talked about when you said something along the lines of, even somebody that's deep into their career or long into their career can have a problem. So I guess I would ask the Kellies, either one, do you see the problems occurring early in someone's career, or do you find that it is something that just builds, and after 20 years I end up with something triggers me and I end up with a major crisis?
So I'll say my experience has been the sort of the stigma of mental health and the reluctance to accept it and then to encourage and get help for it seems to be more closely aligned with people who have been in the career a while. I think that, I'm old, but I think the younger generation has sort of grown up with an understanding of mental health and a normalcy of treatment. And so I look at, for example, some of my, 25-year-old firefighters that I represent in the union. And just last week or a week and a half ago, they took a call of a baby, 2 months old, who was severely beaten and who today just died. And they took that call, had to do the CPR. The father was the one who had beaten his own child. And so as I was talking to them and I said, who took that call? They said, well, we did. And I said, okay, what are you doing next? And they're like, we're going to see a counselor. Like it was normal for them. Of course, we're going to go do that. Like they felt okay, but they still are going to do that. And I think, so I do think it's sort of that, for lack of a better word, old school thinking of being able to stuff it down and suck it up. And the younger kids, feel a little more normal about it. So hopefully with time, things will continue to improve. in that arena, but that's at least what I'm seeing, what my experience is. Kellie's might be a little different.
Yeah, I was gonna say the only thing that I would add to that through like some of the trainings that I've been taking and trying to figure out what are best practices when I have first responders coming in and how to do their intakes and everything is I've been giving them the it's called the Adverse Childhood Events Questionnaire. And all that does is it asks like I think it's maybe 7 questions about just things that may have been going on in a person's childhood that are a little bit more adverse than what you would expect a kid to be exposed to. And if they check any of those off, in my head, if they don't necessarily have a trauma history yet, for first responders, it puts them at a higher risk that once they get into this field and start working in this field, if you already had some things you were exposed to when you were younger, you are more likely to develop PTSD through the work that you're going to be doing in this job. So that again just goes back to my point of start therapy sooner rather than later, because when you're coming into it and you have some kind of a background like that, it's kind of like you're already behind the 8 ball, unless you've already had some experience with therapy up to that point. But if you haven't, that's a great time to start therapy and build a relationship with a therapist, because now you can do some work here, maybe take a break or just see them once a month. And then when something pops up on the job, like what you're talking about, I already established this relationship with the therapist. We've already done some work. This thing that I'm coming in for, we can handle that, I don't know, in like a couple of months, or depending on what it is, maybe like a year. But it's just kind of like with anything, why people go to their 6-month dental appointments, catch it now. So it's easier to deal with than waiting until later.
And I'll add to that, Kellie, because I think you're exactly right. You know, when clients come in my door, come in David's door, by the time they're in our doors, most of the time, something has already happened. I think the Law Enforcement Academy in Iowa, and probably in most states, maybe devote an hour, maybe 2 hours in a 16-week training course to mental health of the officer, right, versus mental health of the community. Very little time is spent. But by the time they get to us, something's already gone sideways. And I'm usually, and David's probably usually the first person who gives them a list of counselors and says, please reach out to these people. They have experience. They're all wonderful. I've met them all personally. Reach out to one of them and just have one meeting, one conversation. And oftentimes that's the first time they've ever been given a list of somebody they can go talk to versus go back to the department psychologist, which everybody is fearful of.
So
it should be happening at the academy, or it should be happening when they start their job. They should be given, here's a list of places, people, and resources. We encourage you, to start that relationship early, just as you say, like you would with the dentist.
So when someone actually does come through your door, Kellie, or your door, David, what's a good outcome? Am I hoping to get my job back? Am I hoping to get help? What's a good outcome for me?
This is going to be the most lawyerly answer, but it depends. A lot of that's just going to be driven by the client. We work really hard not to say, here's what we think should happen. It's more of, let's talk about where you want to be, what your goals are, and then sort of to the extent we can get to an end goal, what steps do we need to take to help you with that? We're also very, open with our clients that you do what you need to do to get better or to make sure that you're okay. Do not be making decisions based on what you think will help or hurt your legal case. Some folks are afraid, well, if I go talk to a counselor, is that going to come up in my case and make me look bad? And we say, don't even think about that. Because, the legal process is long, it's grueling. If I filed a lawsuit tomorrow, we're not getting a trial date for 18 months in Iowa right now. And people are going to say things about you. So it's not generally a fun process. And so a good outcome is one that helps get the client to some form of an equilibrium, whatever that is for them. Sometimes it's trying to get their job back, though. Realistically, a lot of times that's just not going to happen. That bond, that trust in employment has generally been broken. And especially in a first responder relationship, I mean, that, and Kellie could speak to it more than me, but that bond is all the more important. It's not somebody, an insurance company talking about the person in the cubicle next to them. Like, you've got to rely on these folks. And if that trust isn't there, it's really hard to gain back. Now, that being said, we've represented clients who were not terminated. We brought, for example, harassment claims from employed members of fire departments who remained employed after the litigation through the jury trial. Incredibly brave people. But when we're looking at outcomes, we're a little bit hamstrung in the civil justice system. There are only so many things we can do, whether it's going to be some sort of pecuniary outcome or whether it's going to be, just helping them advance in some part of their life. It really does depend. And we try to be very open and honest with them about what the legal process entails, what remedies the laws under which we can bring a claim do and do not have. And really make sure that, if they're going to go down that path with us, that it's a partnership.
Anything to add to that, Kellie Paschke?
Sure. I mean, I would agree with everything David says. My priority, just like his, when that client walks through my door, my number one priority and question is make sure you are well, because you have to be well to do this process. Not my perspective, but my clients are often a little different because of my union work. A lot of times my clients come in my door before the adverse employment action actually happens, either while it's brewing, so to speak, or, maybe while they've been put on paid administrative leave or while they're being investigated. And so the ability to try and prevent, like a termination, we might have more options at our disposal, but the reality is they rarely work. I mean, as David, I think, said, oftentimes the employer says, well, yeah, I know you say that now, but that's not an excuse. Your mental health is not an excuse. Or sometimes I hear employers say, well, yeah, we saw something was wrong, but we're not allowed to ask if something's wrong. Well, that's silly, right? Just last month I had a firefighter who was having some mental health issues, take 2 sick days, and his employer fired him because they decided that he had a doctor's note, and they still decided he was abusing the sick leave policy. The message that sends to our first responders is so detrimental, because everybody else sees and hears what happened, and then they are less likely to come forward and to get help when they do really need it.
So, Kellie Medendorf, talk to me about the volunteer world. I mean, you've been a volunteer firefighter for, I guess I'm not allowed to say how many years you've been a volunteer firefighter. I'm not even going to guess how many years you've been a volunteer firefighter, but for a few years anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably, what's the analog here for, employment actions, adverse employment actions? Do they just take you aside and say, we don't want you to volunteer anymore? What happens here?
It's like any other nonprofit charitable organization that you can volunteer at. It's just run by people who are trying to do the best that they can at the end of the day. But, especially in something like emergency services, where, again, you're dealing with some of these pretty intense incidents, and we're all human at the end of the day. So we're going to have some sort of reaction to that. It's not always handled in the best way. And then when we're talking about something like volunteer firefighting, it's not really something where you can just maybe show up for a couple hours once a month. Like, we are given, we used to be given pagers. Now we just have an app on our phone that goes off every single time we get a call. So that can come at any point in the day. You could be in the middle of doing anything, a lot of times in the middle of the night where you're supposed to be sleeping, but somebody needs help. So you have to go and respond to those kinds of things. We have to maintain all the apparatus in our stations. We have to do fundraising. We have to talk to politicians to get funds. We have to pay our own bills. And there's just so much that goes along with it. And then throw in the mental health piece. Where's the time for that? Again, we're stretched, especially volunteer firefighting. It's really difficult right now to recruit anybody to continue to do it. So a lot of times, like at my fire department, there was usually like a select group of people that tended to be the ones doing a lot of this type of stuff. So where does mental health fit in? It generally doesn't. unless you have a therapist that's one of your members and she's hounding everybody to go see a therapist.
So, David, you said, or someone said that if you get into this line of work, you should have expected these types of things to occur. Accidents, dismemberments, shootings, 99% boredom, whatever the case may be. And as we've had the discussion, each of you have kind of pushed back. That's really not why people got into it. But shouldn't they have expected that at some point in time? I mean, didn't somebody ever stop and say, hey, 99% of the time you're going to be totally bored, and 1% of the time you're going to see somebody that was in a fatal car accident or a fatal shooting or robbery, and shouldn't they be expecting these types of issues?
Well, I think to some degree, they are maybe expecting, or at least knowing, that they're going to be the ones that get to run right toward the scene when everyone's running away. I think that is something that can bring some folks to the profession. I think they can expect the hard things, but they don't expect the trauma that reflects back onto them. I think that they think, I'm going to get in here and I'm going to be, the guy, the lady, the guy that goes in and saves folks and helps them. And what they're not maybe as aware of is what that's going to do to them. Maybe not just in one specific incident, right? One very traumatic event, but a lot of this is just cumulative. Matt testified just about the sheer volume of, folks who died, passed away from suicide, dozens, maybe even hundreds over his career. I mean, that is something, to Kellie's point earlier, that somebody like me can't even fathom, right? Most folks will see a dead body just a few times in their lives at funerals, right? And Matt testified about, he might have to go to some horrific car scene or some murder scene or something like that. And then the next call is somebody who's reporting that their yard gnome was stolen. And he's still got to approach that second person like it's the most important call of the day. And so, again, I think Kellie said earlier, we'll just put it away. We'll deal with our feelings later. But when there's not a good outlet of knowing when you're going to deal with them, you just sort of go with this mentality that Kellie Paschke talked about, which we heard about at trial: suck it up, stuff it down. Or in a different case, there had been evidence that a police chief at a conference on mental health said, well, I'll tell you how to deal with PTSD. You just put your pants on and go do your job. And the messaging that sends, of course, is very bad. And so I think if we can, I think a lot of it comes with education. It comes with folks that have been through it. They can help talk to the newer folks. I liked what Kelly Medendorf was talking about earlier about, the dental checkup or whatnot, treating the mental health the same as the physical health, establishing the rapport, establishing treatment earlier, just to check in, because being told or educated that you get to see and deal with the really difficult circumstances, but that is just going to have an effect on you. So make sure that you're going to see somebody so that it doesn't have potentially the really longer term and more serious damage. I think would help, because like I said, I think folks know and see themselves as being the ones that can go in and help. They're just not thinking of what that's going to mean for their own mental health.
Kellie Paschke, I'm sorry, you were going to say?
Yeah, I would just jump in to add to that. I think it also starts with, we have to stop thinking that mental health issues or injuries are any different than a physical injury. And I think, and David knows what case I'm talking about. We had a Supreme Court case in Iowa a couple of years ago that dealt with a dispatcher who took a dead baby call. And she had taken, thousands of trauma calls in her career, but that one hit her different. And she'd even taken other dead baby calls, but that one hit her different. And in the opinion where our court was upholding her entitlement to seek benefits, our court wrote, we don't tell a police officer, well, you signed up to be a police officer, you signed up to get in a car accident, you knew you were going to be driving fast, you should have been able to somehow avoid that, or you should accept that injury as your own because you knew you'd be driving fast as a police officer. And we would never say that. We would never say you've accepted that injury and you signed up for it. Why do we do that with mental health? And I think it's still just because there's so much misunderstanding about what mental health is. So the sooner we can get in, like Kellie said, like it is a training and all those other things to normalize the behavior and the treatment and the conditions, the better.
Could you summarize for us the conclusion, if you will, or at least the final the status as we know it of the Matthew Hunter case?
David, I'll let you do that one.
So we took the case to trial October right into November 2023. That's when we obtained the actual verdict. There's just some legal mechanisms that occur after that, some post-trial motions. The city has since had appealed the verdict. It was directed to the Iowa Court of Appeals. So you write more briefs, you submit briefs, you go, you have an argument in person, an oral argument. We did that, I believe, in April of this year. I'm going to the length of the process, and we are still waiting for an opinion. And so essentially the city has challenged the bases for the verdict on a number of different grounds. We, of course, resisted that and are clearly wanting that the jury's voice be heard. And so we're just waiting. You don't get a specific deadline. And so when we see that there are new batches of Court of Appeals opinions coming out, we wait to see, okay, is Matt's case going to be one of them? And right now it's not. So we know we'll probably be waiting until at least sometime in September, if not longer. Who knows?
Wow. Well, look, I want to be respectful of your time. I did want to say it was shocking to me to find out that there are virtually triple the number of suicides in emergency responders than there are people that die in the line of duty. It says quite a bit about the potential mental health issues that exist in emergency responders. It's certainly something that we need to address. But I'd like to give each of you 1 minute to kind of summarize what you would like to say, and if you'd like to update anything, that would be fine. Kellie Meddendorf, we'll go with you first.
This is something that is particularly important to me because I feel like just in general, people have a really tough time talking about death by suicide, but especially within the first responder world, where that quote where they said that they weren't going to look into it just kills me to my soul as being someone who is a therapist, but also involved in this community, where if tomorrow I were to take my own life, that there's a mentality that exists out there by people that I today think truly care, and we have this brotherhood and sisterhood with each other where we would want to know what happened, and there's going to be people that just say don't look into it, or let's not talk about it. No, we need to talk about it, because the quote from that article that sticks with me that I shared with my colleagues that are also first responders and therapists is that, I believe it was Joe's wife, said he just didn't know how to stay here. And that's the part that people don't understand when it comes to death by suicide, is I don't just wake up in the morning and think that that's what I'm going to do. A lot of times this has been a very long and painful mental process for me, and I don't know how to stay here. So this, based on everything that we just talked about, there are so many things that we touched on that just feed into why a emergency responder would not know how to continue to stay here with the amount of mental pain that they might be carrying around. And I just wish that more people would think about it from that standpoint.
Thank you. David, what about you?
My nerd side out here, we referenced Stoicism a couple times. I'm actually kind of a fan, and there was this Stoic who's also a Roman emperor named Marcus Aurelius. In one of his quotes, he talks about the power of the human ability to adapt. And he said that the impediment to action impels action, and that the obstacle becomes the way. And I think what we've learned over these cases and talking to folks is there are a lot of obstacles in the way when having to figure out how exactly to break down all the barriers. And I think that when we talk like this and we can identify them, then that becomes the way, whether it's education early when somebody is joining a first responder force, whether it's treating mental health the same as physical health, whether it's making sure that those folks at the top are not still walking around with, dogmas from 50 years ago. I think that there is a lot that folks may think within a department, which actually is not reflective in the public at large. Kellie and I think both were really amazed at how, when we talked to the jury in this case, at the beginning, when you're picking a jury, we had to talk to them about these issues. We had to talk to them about mental health. We had to talk to them about suicide. We had to talk to them about first responders. And we were blown away at how these random, by definition, strangers opened up to us about their own experiences, how they got it to a degree that I did not expect. It became very clear very quickly that, the overall mentality on mental health is shifting. And, it's on us in all of our different respective buckets to do what we can to continue pushing that needle.
So Kellie, I'm going to give you the last word, but I want you to understand that you're following David Albrecht, Renaissance man.
Right. Marcus Aurelius. Great. Yeah, I guess I'll just leave with this. I was Matt Hunter's case was my first mental health disability discrimination case. And I learned so much from him that I feel like I have become a fierce advocate for first responders, not just with disabilities, but specifically those with mental health conditions, sometimes to the point where I'm screaming from the rooftops, we have to fight this, even sometimes when it doesn't make sense to. Like David talks about the jury, it was so refreshing to hear sort of the outside world, right? The world outside of first responders get it. And it's refreshing and it's encouraging. So I remind all of my unions, I remind all of my clients, people do care. They care about you. They understand this. But Matt Hunter's case, even for Matt, was not about Matt Hunter. He decided to fight back because he wanted to help people who came after him. He knew he wasn't going to get his job back. And we weren't even sure, frankly, that we could get a verdict. It was, a hard case, but we felt so strongly and passionately about his case. But because of him and because of the publicity, even stories like you saw, more people are standing up, more first responders are standing up. They're understanding the problem is not them, it's sort of the system and the bureaucracy and the paramilitary organizations that they work in. And so I have been encouraged by the number of people willing to come forward and tell their story and stand up for themselves and get help. And all of them are doing well now, and many more cases to go, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel and they see it. And I haven't had a single one regret standing up yet. So
good. I appreciate that. Let me conclude by saying our sponsor today is Equilibria Psychological and Consultation Services, whose mission is to help individuals achieve their personal potential and long-term growth by compassionately and respectfully helping clients live in balance. Visit equilibriapcs.com, equilibriapcs.com. You can look for them on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also look for me on Instagram, Daniel J. Gomez 24, and on LinkedIn. Now for the disclaimer. I am not a medical professional and I am not providing medical advice. The opinion of our speakers is solely their own. This podcast is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced without the express written consent of EPCS Management, LLC.